Hello, welcome to the Journey of Grief, Becoming Us Without Them. I'm Barbara Field, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I've created this YouTube channel so that people who are grieving various kinds of losses just have a place to come and talk about their grief. So today I've invited 4 people who are grieving the loss of a parent to share their experience with us. And let's start with Sherry. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about the person that you lost?
I'm Sherry Shockley, and I live in Louisiana. And in the end of 2020, I lost my mother. She died of cancer, and it started in the fall of 2019. And it was breast cancer. And then we found out she also had lung cancer. And she went through the treatments, and nothing really worked. I think we had one positive report from the doctor when her cyst actually did shrink at one point. But each time we went to the doctor, it was progressing. It seemed to be an aggressive cancer. It ended up going in her bone and then in her brain at the end. But she was able to be home during that time. My parents were my next door neighbor too. So we were available and close to them through that. And not just us, but a lot of family members shared in the caregiving. And she was 82. So she really, looking back now, I see that she had a long life. But her mother lived to be 100, and I always expected mom would too. But you don't get to choose that. And it was during, COVID was involved during that time. So there were some blessings with that and some problems with it. My son, who lived in Dallas, was able to be home for several months and be able to spend time with her and help with her care. And but one of the negatives was going to the doctor. Only one person could go with her. So it was hard when you heard bad news every time you went. And I always felt like I needed to have my poker face on and not act sad because I was with mom, so you had to not really respond negatively, or I felt like I couldn't ask certain questions because her mind was still there, and I felt like it was her path, and she could ask the questions she wanted to know. And so, but that was hard during the COVID time when only one person could go to the doctor at a time, because you always were there hearing bad news. But she was a trooper and an inspiration through it all. She's always been a strong person, and she was with cancer too. She really was. So she was just an inspiration through it all. And at the end, she was out of it. And we were very blessed. There were so many blessings through it all. We were praying for a lot of things. And one of the things we prayed for was her pain, to not have a lot of pain. And even when she had several lesions on her bones, she was not having pain till the very end. It was really amazing. But anyway, it's just, as y'all all know, it's just hard to watch that. Death is just horrible. And watching someone suffer and you feeling helpless is just horrible. But we made it through. So, but it was hard to watch. And she was on hospice for like 3 weeks. And that was really scary for me. I'm not a medical person. I don't want to be a nurse. I don't want to be responsible for that serious of stuff. Like I really struggled with we were, giving her medicine by mouth when she really wasn't swallowing or anything. And it scared me to death once I did that, and it was almost like she got choked. And I just finally said, I can't do that anymore. That can't be my job. I feel hyper responsible about that, and I just can't do it. So I'm glad I said that, because I really needed to say that, because I couldn't handle that part of it, and someone else could. So, but anyway, I think that her being that sick, some of your grief starts before they die, because you can tell they're not going to get better. When you can finally accept that and see that they're not going to get better, you don't want them to suffer, and you can't help them, and no one can help them. There's no other options that you have. And I remember near the end, she asked me, so there's no other treatment left? And I told her, yes, ma'am, there's nothing left, Mom. And I was glad that I could tell her that, because if the roles had been reversed, I would want someone to be honest with me. And I'm glad she felt like she could ask me, because I think it's important to be honest about those things that, personally, I would want that for me. But anyway, her being so sick, I feel like grieving had already started. You could tell that she was leaving and wasn't going to get better, and nothing can make her better. And I think the mourning started before she was gone, really, for me, watching her suffer. And you don't want her to suffer. So she wouldn't want to live like that. And anyway, it's just, I don't know. That was my story.
Perfect.
And
thank you. That was a hard story.
yeah.
So Patti, how about you?
Yeah, so yeah, I can really relate to what Sherry shared about the grieving starts before. My mom passed April 1st of 2021, and she had stage 4 and 5 kidney disease, um, along with other illnesses. So she was diabetic probably from the time I was in high school. But from about 2016-ish to 2017, there were lots of trips to the hospital, emergency rooms, near-death incidents, and she finally was put on hospice. My brother was a hospice nurse as well, and so we just kind of rallied together, really, my siblings and I, at that point, to care for her. We were able to bring her home. Probably, yeah, she was in a living assistance facility here in the Sacramento area, and during COVID. And so you weren't able to see them, you weren't able to get in, and it was very, very challenging. So we were finally able to get her to decide that she would move in with my sister. And she was there a month prior to dying, but she was excited to go to my sister's and be there. Prior to my mom passing, we were also shocked with my dad, who died of COVID, August 4th, 2020. And he was 80 years old, very strong. He was still working and doing construction, and it was unexpected, completely unexpected. So he went in the hospital July 4th. He was one of, a few COVID patients within the hospital at the time, in a small community hospital. And they allowed us to visit. I remember going July 4th. We weren't able to get in, but closer, I think a week later, the director of the hospital and the nursing director allowed us to put on, like cover up and go in to see him. I chose not to, but my siblings um, decided to go. And he fought COVID as much as he could, but he succumbed to like the medicine and medications they gave him were attacking his kidneys, and so he had kidney failure ultimately. And my parents were not married. They hadn't been married for 20 something years. They died 8 months apart. And so yeah, there was like a journey of grief for me throughout that whole process of, getting my mom back and forth to the hospital, getting her to doctor's appointments. It was just a lot. My mom also had her foot was dead before she even died. Like it was just like hardened and really, really rough. Like it was really hard to watch. And so we managed that for years. And she never had an amputation, but she ended up um, going, you know, into the hospital and having surgeries and things like that. But, like there was a journey through it. But with my dad, it just was not expected at all. So there was really two differences in how I addressed the grief in losing both my parents within that time period. Pretty difficult. So, but yeah, like Sherry said, we got through it and yeah, little by slow and still working through it. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
wow. So, Mike, would you like to introduce us to yourself and your dad?
Yeah, so my name's Mike Wood, live in Northern California. And last August, 2024, we had gone down, me and my wife had gone down, and my whole family went down to San Clemente. It's a beach town to get married. And about 20 minutes before we were going to get out, we had been swimming at the ocean. And my dad was 69. He was a little bit out of shape. We were in the water, and I kept telling him, "Can you get out of the water? Can you get out of the water? You're making me nervous." And he didn't want to get out. So we get back in. The waves, like I said, were pretty big. And I looked to my right, and he had been swept quite a ways away from me. And so I started swimming, try to get to him. And I see a big wave come crash over him, and I could see him struggling. I thought he was having a heart attack. Um, so I see him struggling. He's trying to get his head out of the water. And I know he saw me because he looked at me. And that final wave came and hit him. And I couldn't find him. And then he just floated face first, first in the water. He was just floating there. And I got to him. I flipped him over. And he was gone. I already knew he was gone. But so I pulled him up out of the water. And there was a million people at the beach. My whole family's there. I collapsed. They administered CPR right away. I mean, the whole beach was circled around us praying, and my mom. I think my mom reacting the way she did. She had a pretty much like a nervous breakdown that was almost as traumatic as watching my dad die. I think for everybody on the beach. And then they took him into the parking lot, put an iron lung on him. And, you know, it was hard because they were working on him in front of us the whole time. And then they took him to a local hospital, and he had gone 45 minutes without oxygen to his brain. We knew what that meant. They kept him alive, or alive for 2 days, long enough for the rest of the family to fly down and say goodbye. Initially, I was not going to go in and see him, but I'm glad I did, because he looked a lot better when I saw him in the hospital versus when I saw him and tried to rescue him on the beach. So the accident happened on the 8th. We decided to let him go on the 10th. So it hasn't even been a year. But that's definitely been really hard on our family. It's been really hard on me, being the one to find him and try to save him. But everybody's most of our family's not talking right now. It kind of just drove a wedge between everybody. It's kind of hard to explain. I think everybody's just trying to still figure out what happened. And so at the time I worked with my parents. My dad has a construction company, and I worked for them pretty much my whole life. 39 now, and I started with him when I was in my early 20s. So me and him were very close. We did everything together, like really, really close. So it's been difficult, to say the least, to try to kind of understand what happened, and, you know, trying to figure out life now without him, and the new, just without him. So that's my story. There's a lot more to it, but it's, kind of hard to tell, but that's the basics of it.
Yeah, death is horrible. And those are all really examples that death is horrible. So, Sherry, you wanted us to talk about just that, getting to a point where you can accept the death, like you mentioned earlier, just accepting that your mom was dying. And then Patti had some of that too with both your parents, because it was a slow trudge. And so Mike, that came more suddenly for you, but even afterwards, it was such a shock. It's getting yourself, oh, that's right, he's not here. Oh, that's right. So let's start with Sherry. So just talk about that, working your way towards that acceptance that's really happening or happened.
Yeah, I hard time even verbalizing that, but I felt like for a long time I just had decided, we were going to beat this. Times when you're diagnosed with cancer, and I found this out since then when I've just read books about people with cancer, that you hear words like, when you find out what type of cancer it is, well that's treatable. Well, if you're a medical person, that means something different to you than like me hearing that, because I thought, well, this can be overcome, but treatable doesn't always mean it's a type of cancer that can be beaten. And you don't ever know with cancer. Some one person will get over it, or go into remission, and others won't. It just all depends on many different aspects of it. But it was just hard to believe that Mom was dying. I think it took me a long time to accept that was what was happening. It had to get really bad before I would believe it. And I sometimes wish doctors would have talked to us differently, told the family more, so we maybe could be ready for what was really happening. We found out there was a hard change near the end we decided that she could go on a trip to see the Ark. I don't know if y'all have heard of Noah's Ark. They've made a replica of it in Kentucky, and this was near the end, and it was probably not a wise thing to do at that point. But we made that trip there, and while we were there, she really started talking strangely. You know, you could tell her brain was not working right. And we were that far away from home, and you know, it was scary not being home. I don't know why you feel safer at home, but you do. So we rushed back home with her, and there was a night we were in the emergency room, and an emergency room doctor, I think it's the one that told us that it was in her brain. You know, we didn't even know that. And I guess whenever we had found that out, it would have been horrible news, but we just didn't know what was happening with her at that point. And it was you know, a bad change. That's a pretty significant change when it goes to your brain and affects you in different ways. But it just seemed like and I think that's probably normal for most people as it progresses and it gets worse and you find out more bad news. You just have to process that this is real and it's happening. You can't do anything about it. You can't stop it. You can't help the person that you love. And, you know, I don't know how you prepare yourself for it. You know, with hospice, they give you the little book to tell you what to look for at the end and all. And I know I read those things to look for. I don't know how many times. Well, I guess I'm expecting a checklist that goes in order and it's going to tell me exactly what's happening. It doesn't work that way. You just have to watch it happen and live through it as best you can and do what you can to help the person. But I don't know really how you can make someone be more prepared. I'm big on having information about a situation, and I guess I like more information. I would like the doctors to tell me all you know. I mean, not all you know, because I probably can't understand everything, but give me some information to work with about what we're dealing with, and don't hide information from me. And maybe they weren't. Maybe that's just how it works. But I always felt like, is there a support group for people taking care of people with cancer that you can talk to and ask questions and all? And that's probably how everyone feels when their loved one's dying, is where can I get more information or more answers on this? But anyway, it took a while to catch on that, you know, this was happening. And there could have been some things done a little more ahead of time with Mom, like near the end when I think her brain was already pretty affected, she started talking about her funeral and what she wanted done. But she was struggling to, I think Mom knew sometimes what she wanted to say, but between her brain and her mouth, there was a glitch where she couldn't quite get the words out. So there were a couple of things about her funeral she was able to tell us, but I kind of wish we had planned that earlier so she could have told us more exactly how she wanted it done. You know, not that that is a huge deal, but it would have been nice to know it was all her decisions. I mean, I think the funeral worked out fine, but I don't know how, like with a diagnosis of something that may go either way, how you bring yourself to say, okay, let's look at the worst case scenario. You know, this might end in death. What would I need to do to be prepared if it goes that way? Because I think we feel like if you talk like that, then you're almost jinxing the person, or you're not being encouraging and saying, you know, I feel like you can overcome this and we can get past it. So you don't want to do that, but it's almost, I guess we could all do better at being prepared, telling people when I die, this is what I want done. And nobody wants to do that. So most of us don't do that ahead of time. But anyway, that's some of the things I've wondered about. And, you always look back and think, what could I have done differently, or what might have been better, or what might have been more helpful to her. So those are just some of the things I've wondered about.
Yeah. And every single one of us who sustains a big old grief like that plays those videos. Well, if I should have, and if I could have. Nowadays, the people that are really doing the brain research on grieving, they're saying we can keep them. We can remember more and more how much we love them and how much they mean to us. But those, they call them counterproductive thoughts or something. It only keeps your brain trying to find them and keep them, instead of letting your brain know, I'm not going to find them in any of the places. I'm not going to find them on the calendar. My time and space attachment to them is being remapped down to nothing. But my attachment to them and how much I love them can get as big as I want. But it's a very tricky thing, because your brain just really wants to go there.
Yes. True.
Especially every year on the anniversary, when my brain starts coming up with a new reason why, if I would have done something different, it won't be dead this year.
Yes. And
Yeah.
on the anniversary, that's true. But even grief is so weird. Like every once in a while, it sneaks up on you, and you feel something feels different. And sometimes you can look back on the timeline and say, oh, this was when there was a certain turn of events, and I don't know, that it's not even just the anniversary. It's certain things in the year or seasons that remind you of other things that happened through the grief process. So, and you
Sure. All
don't even realize it. There's a wave that comes over you. And if you can stop and process, you sometimes can figure out, oh, excuse me.
Sure. Yeah. So, Patti, accepting the death is coming.
Yeah, so gosh, I mean, kind of what piggybacking on what Sherry was talking about, I know that for us, my mother was the kind of person who had all of the ducks in a row. Like she had listed out for her services, like the type of minister, the song she wanted sang, the dress she wanted to be buried in. Like she had it all laid out. Everything was paid for, like right up front. We had the conversation before, like years before, because I was the third child, and that's kind of what my role was to just figure everything out. So that made that part, like I didn't have to think about it. So once she passed, um, for my mom, it was, I think, the journey of, watching the decline. Um, I was in the process of working out, there was like a burial plot. And my mom was on hospice, like I said. And hospice was wonderful. They are really, really helpful. And they just kind of help walk you through this process. But the hospice nurse, who I'm friends with to this day, we go to church together, she looked in my mom's eyes and she's like, oh, she'll probably go to bed and she won't get up. And I fed my mom dinner. Like every moment I was just like savoring, because I knew that I wasn't going to have her long. And so that process was a lot more, I think, gentle, and it felt really sweet. And it wasn't as abrupt and shocking, because I had all these years with her and had all these conversations with her. and I savor those to this day. With my dad, it was like I also lost my brother. Let's see, April, June, 2 months, 2.5 months after my mom died. So with my dad and my brother, I was just very angry, and it was like it didn't make sense to me. My dad was always the strongest man, like I didn't see him being sick very rarely. And so that was so much harder. I would hear people speak of COVID and I would just get infuriated. And and if you know me, I'm not a person who gets mad very easily. And I just was so angry that people were living with COVID and my dad had to be taken away. And so I had to really work through that and just know, like the day after my dad passed, I just had this sense of all of my ancestors like greeting him in heaven. And that kind of settled me to know that he was going to be okay wherever he was. And, like we couldn't have a funeral for him, we couldn't do any service. He died alone. And all of those things were really devastating. Um, I think the one thing that helped, well, a couple of things was being with like other people were in the same boat. There were other people dying of the same thing, of COVID. And there were people around that were talking about it. And so grief became more, I don't know, palpable, I guess you would say. And there were other resources that were available. But I also found that spending time with my siblings, which we weren't close before, but spending time with them really helped to ease the pain some days. And some of the memories, like I had a video we took of my dad. We just kind of, because of COVID, we couldn't get together. For like his 80th birthday, we did a Zoom meeting and I recorded that. And so going back, doing some writing um and then like as time went on, a friend of mine, she was like, "Oh, I just had a day where like I allowed myself one day of grief." So like Wednesdays was my grief day, and I would write letters in the morning. In the morning I wouldn't take calls. I'd go into work later. So I just gave myself that space to allow myself to grieve, and of course I did grieve other times, but it was just like this time period that I was gracious to myself to like say, okay, it's okay. And so um, that helped me to be, I guess, a little bit more of in acceptance of it. But yeah, my dad didn't have anything in order, complete opposite of my mom. And like he was married to his third wife, and that was a challenge. So he was cremated when he didn't want to be, and it's like a whole nother story. So like that was like a separate grieving process. I had to separate that out and get help, with a therapist, because like I just needed that help because it was just too much. Like I was like trying to do all these different grieving processes, but I'm like, I need help. So I just got the help that I felt like I needed to grow. I would say grow into acceptance of the loss. Yep.
Yep. That's a lot, 3 in a year. Pretty horrible.
Ah,
Okay, Mike, any thoughts on accepting the death? I mean, you had like 15 minutes to go from standing in the water, griping with your dad about getting out, to walking away and letting other people try to resuscitate them.
Yeah, I think the hard part, I can relate to the anger that she was just talking about. I think for me, it's why was it me? And I have a couple things, but why was it me? I was the closest with him. We did everything together. I talked to him 500 times a day. And why did it have to be me that found him? You know, I also was heavily abused. So this was my stepdad, but he was my dad since I was really young. And I was heavily abused by my real dad. So the bond was even tighter between us because that is somebody that I really looked up to, right? And so I do still, as Barbara knows, we've worked on my anger, but I do still struggle with, it's not that I'm mad at a certain person or people in general. I just sometimes I just feel angry that he was taken from me in the way that he was. Now, I mean, I wouldn't want him to suffer either. So hearing the other side of things, I mean, though that's terrible in its own way, right? But I think one of the other things I struggle with is the flashbacks of most mornings, almost every morning. I'll wake up, and I wake up early because I do construction. And it's just him floating in the water, or it's his face when I flip him over, or you know what I mean. Those have been difficult to navigate around. Um, I used to drink a lot. I mean, I use the term sober lightly. I wasn't like a super hard drug addict or anything, but I can't turn to something else, right? So I just trying to do that in a healthy way. Um, that's been difficult, but my main topic is I can't call him. So I disagreed with.
Uh-oh. Oh, there you are.
Okay.
You're back.
Um, I did not agree with the way the business was being ran, and so I left and got a new job. And so I think he would be sad about that, but I also think he would be proud of the job that I got. And so I can't call him and say, "Hey, you'd be proud of me. You know, I got this awesome job." That's difficult. Or, "Hey, not that I don't know how to fix sprinklers, but hey, my sprinkler's broken. You want to come down and help me fix it?" He lived close. Or he would call me, "Hey, son, come up here and give me a hand." Just the little things that I think we take for granted. You know, I also think that our parents, well, not always, but him, for me, he was the one person in my life that wanted to see me win with no strings attached. It didn't matter how much money, it didn't matter how hard a work it was. It was just pure, he just wanted to help me be a good man or be successful, however that looked. And having that rock taken away is difficult, right? You just kind of feel like you're just floating around now with no guidance. And I think that's hard to, now you have to be the rock, or are you going to be that person, right? So I think that's difficult. That's been difficult for me to navigate um, with no leader, right? So that I think has been the biggest thing for me. Those three things.
Well, and that's what you wanted us to talk about, is figuring out how to fill those holes and how to stop being angry that, like you said, that your rock is gone, and giving yourself permission to find other ways to get those needs met and find other people to depend on. All super, super hard.
Mm.
So thanks for getting us started with that. So Cherry, talk about that now, because you lived across the driveway from your mom, and you guys were, I mean, like, you went to church together, you did all kinds of awesome things together. She was very involved in the lives of all her grandchildren. And so, what are the hard parts of moving on?
Well, I can appreciate what Mike said about waking up in the morning. I remember right after mom died, it's like every morning you wake up and you remember again that it's real. You remember again. I mean, that for me has gotten better with time. It's been a long time. So I don't have that short viewpoint, but I do remember what you're talking about, how you have to remember this really happened and she's gone or whatever. But um, I can also relate to him about his stepdad was his rock. That's how I felt about mom. That um, like that she was the one. I mean, no one will ever love us like that person did. Those people in our lives that just, that you could talk to them about anything. They believed in you, encouraged you. Um, you could always ask them for advice, and it was good advice. And when they're gone, I do think they're irreplaceable in some way. I do think there are other people out there that we can find if we're blessed and lucky enough to, but I don't know that they'll ever love us like a particular parent, or, that's just precious. Um, a friend of mine who was close to mom's age described mom as, she said she was a force of nature and we just followed in her path. She led the way and we followed along. And that's really mom's personality was like that. Her sureness of herself. I didn't realize how I depended on her being in this world for some confidence that I had. And I feel like I've lost some of that when I lost her. And it's kind of hard to find it, but I think with time that does get better. And you realize that, because I was like, I don't know how I can live without her in this world. I just really wondered, but I'm still here. I'm still living. Uh, and, there's good things and bad things that happen in life still. And I'm muddling through without her. But I also think when you have people like that in your life, they've taught you things by how they lived, how they treated you, how they cheered you on, that you have inside of you still. It's not the same as them being here, but I don't know that we really realize how much they've given and put into us that we can draw from.
Mhm.
We have to live without them, but it doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It's still not easy. One of the times I noticed really missing mom, she loved working in the flower bed and out in the yard. And when I was working out in the yard, she'd usually come over and see what I was doing or, visit. And I really miss that. Little things like that, that that meant a lot to the person you love, that you don't get to do that with them. They don't share that with you. But that surprised me that I would think about that. I would expect her to still come over and talk to me when I'm working in my flower bed. Where is she? Where is she? I want her to come talk to me now. But that's really challenging. And I don't know that I have any words of advice, but um, trying to remember how strong she was. And I've never felt as strong as mom, but I do think that I have some of her strength in me. So but it's hard without them here. And I can feel for him.
Yeah, for sure. I have found, like you said, kind of neurologically, every minute we ever had with them is still in our body. It's just a retrieval problem. So sometimes when something breaks, or I'll say to myself, all right, what would Butch do? And I'm surprised when the answers actually come in my head that are not too terrible.
Right. That's great. That's great.
Oh wait, I remember working on that with him. Okay, I got this.
Uh-huh. Yeah. That's great.
So Patty, moving on without
Without
three
them.
of them.
Yes. I felt like, you know, an orphan for a while. And it was the weirdest feeling because I'm like, I'm a grown woman and I feel like I'm an orphan. Um, I think it was just that processing of losing, two wonderful people. And I can relate to, calling my dad, oh, I don't know how to change this. He was the kind of guy that would, like walk you through the steps of how to change the light fixture or, how to fix the lawnmower, or like, whatever you're working on, you can always call him. And, my mom was the one to like that soft place to fall. And so, I still feel like that sometimes where I don't have that soft place to fall. And like I said, being around family members has helped. So we kind of committed between my cousins and my sisters, we kind of grew up together. We committed to not wasting time. And um, the girls, like we do these girls trip, the cousins, sister cousins, and we were doing that for a couple of years. And I just came back last night from visiting my aunt in South Carolina. A bunch of us got together because she's my mom's last sibling. And she's 80 years old and she's like a hoot. And we love hanging out with her and just, memories and family and enjoying who's here, right, in our presence. And so that to me, like I tell you, my flight there was 12 hours, my flight home was 12 hours, and it was worth the time I spent with my family. So that to me is what keeps me like grounded is my time with family and not wasting, oh, we're going to get together later. Oh, we're going to do this, but not putting it off what we can do today. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I've done. And then I went back to school because I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, doing the things that they would be proud of. I think for me, that's what drives me today is like doing things that I know that they would be like, yes, you should do that, or no, don't do that. And just living life to the full. Yeah.
Yeah. So Patty, you had wanted us to talk about the importance of, to the best of our ability, sort of that living every day as if it's your last and making sure that you settle the things and cleared everything up that you possibly can, because those I should have said will drive you crazy for the rest of your life. But when
Right.
you have a lingering sort of death, you have a chance to say some of those, but those aren't the ones that typically stick in your throat. It's the sudden deaths, like your dad, where you couldn't get in there and talk to him and couldn't necessarily say all the things. So not only clearing up the problems between you to the best that you can, saying the things that you want to be said, but also you wanted us to talk about getting ready so you don't dump all that on everybody else at the last minute.
Yeah. Thank you for that reminder. Like with my dad, um, we had spoken for years and I had done the work to get to that point. And I really wanted to make sure that I was clear. Like I said before, they allowed us to come into the room when he was, had COVID, but I didn't go because I was already resolved and I didn't want to see him in that state. So like the year before, like to the date, July 4th, I traveled to Arkansas with my dad, and he showed me where he was raised, and we just had worked out a lot. So we had a father-daughter trip. And over the years, I had just been, having these different conversations. And I did have the conversation with my mom to say, hey, you know, we need to get these things in order. And, like I would have those conversations that are really challenging sometimes to have. My kids haven't had them with me yet, but I need to do that. But I mean, it helped a lot to know that no matter when that time comes, that we're resolved, like not to leave anything on the table. So now, like with my siblings and I, we try to work those things out. And with my kids as well, I try to work it out as soon as I can to not wait until tomorrow. That's really the key. It's just resolving as quickly as we can. I mean, it doesn't always happen right away, but it was helpful with my dad's passing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. And so Mike, some stuff wasn't put on paper, wasn't said. So talking about you, it sounds like you and your dad, your relationship was squared away. You had said all the things and done all the things. But given that he was so young and wasn't expected to die anytime soon, the rest of that was sort of 52 pickup for you guys to figure out after he was gone. So let's talk about the ramifications of not getting it all squared away ahead of time.
Yeah, so some of the business stuff had been taken care of prior to him passing, so that was good. But we didn't know he had a DNR, so they did try to, I mean, I think they would have anyways, but there was things that he had squared away and things that he hadn't. We had to go pick out a headstone. That was really hard on us and my mom. But that, I wouldn't say we didn't struggle with that because that was hard, but that wasn't one of our main issues, because I think for us, our family's huge. We have a big family and a lot of kids, and I think their main concern was the business. It's a fairly large business. It's worth a decent amount of money, and I think that was the concern, right? Unfortunately, that's what it comes down to, is money. But most of that was squared away, even though it was, and a lot of things went the way they weren't supposed to go, which is why I'm not there anymore. But yeah, it was a struggle, but it wasn't terrible.
And how about you, Sherry? Either you or anybody around you feel like they didn't say things they wanted to say, or didn't have enough, like you mentioned earlier, you wished you had more details about the funeral so you can feel more like it was the way she wanted it.
Yeah. Well, I talked about the days that we took mom to the doctor for treatment or whatever. The consults with the doctor, those were difficult, to be just you and mom alone. But being alone with mom and taking turns being alone with mom for that day, they were great memories too, because she was so upbeat. Even if she was going to get treatment, we'd go by and eat somewhere and visit afterwards. And it was like a girls' day. I mean, which is crazy to think you could do that during cancer treatment, but it was great, that part of it. And I remember near the end one day, mom, after a treatment, she was really worn out. And we were in the parking lot leaving, and she just said, I have the sweetest family. And I thought that was just so sweet to hear. She looked so tired. And at the very end, a couple of days before mom died, she had that physical rally time where she became responsive. And we gathered around her bed and had one last time to talk to her, where we felt like maybe she was hearing what we were saying. And I loved that I had time to tell her one more time what a great mom, grandmother, how wonderful she had been in my life. It was just a gift and a blessing. It was just a few days before she was gone, and that was the last time she acted as if she was responsive and trying to communicate. And it was so good to have that time to talk to her and remind her one more time to thank her for what all she had poured into our lives. And that was a real special time.
Yeah. So, if you had just 1 minute to give your very best wisdom, not necessarily advice, but the thing you've learned that you feel is most important in the grief journey, what would it be? So, Patti, would you like to start us out with your 1 minute wisdom? Wait, you're muted.
That's weird. Oh, sorry. Didn't know I muted myself. So the wisdom that I would partake or put forth is have those difficult conversations, before resolve, and also be present for the process if you can. Family is key. Family is key. And that's it.
Oh, Mike, what's your 1 minute of wisdom for us?
I would say the same. I think it's important to take the time to tell the people you love how you feel. Luckily, I'm pretty open. And since he was my stepdad and kind of saved us, I had lots of conversations. He was old school. He would never, ever, ever have had the conversations I had with him if I hadn't brought him up. And so I was able to tell him lots of times that I loved him and that he was important to me, and we cried, and a lot of times he would be like, don't tell anybody, but he was old school, but so for me, I don't have any of that. Of course, it's hard to say that, but I was so open with him. He knew how I felt about him, and I knew how he felt about me. So that, I would say, is, if it's uncomfortable or not, you just do it, because a lot of that generation before us, a lot of people, they're not gonna do that. So that's what I would say.
Cool. Sherry, how about you? What's your 1 minute of wisdom for us?
Well, I'm so grateful that I had the time with her. And one thing I'm real thankful that I did is I wrote things down while it was happening. And I can go back and read those and remember things that I can't remember off the top of my head. But I'm so happy I have those memories and that I wrote them down, and even wrote down my prayers, little things that were going on that I prayed for. And I can go back and read that and have the memory of the moment. It's so overwhelming when you're dealing with someone who's dying that it's hard to handle your emotions, at that time. There's too much going on, and something has to be put to the side. But having those memories written down help me now more than I ever realized they would. And those are nice to go back and read. So I'm glad I did that.
Yeah, that's great. Because you're so foggy during that time, you don't remember anything if you didn't write it down.
That's right.
That's great advice. Well, thank you all so much for being so brave and so honest and sharing so openly. Always, I keep saying it's such an honor to have been part of this. And I appreciate you trusting me to keep you safe and put you on